Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of TERI, I welcome you to the special high-level session titled COP Charter of Actions from Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh. The session will be moderated by Mr. RR Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow TERI. The Science Leadership Address will be given by Professor Pettri Taals, Secretary General, World Meteorological Organization. The keynote address will be by Ms. Leena Nandan, Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India. We will see two COP leadership addresses by Mr. Alok Sharma, COP26 President, and His Excellency Mr. Sameh Shokri, Honorable Foreign Minister, Egypt. We also have three special addresses today by Mr. Takahashi, Executive Director, IGES, Mr. Stig, Director, Department of Climate and Environment, NORAD, Norway, and Ms. Deepali Managing Director, Asia Region Office, Rockefeller Foundation. A very, very warm welcome to all of you. I will now hand over the session to Mr. RR Rashmi to take the discussion forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Anuradha. Let me first once again welcome all of you this afternoon to this special high-level session on the COP Charter of Actions. From Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh. You know, the last year, in 2021, was the year in which we started the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And we had this COP in Glasgow, where a number of important decisions were taken. Glasgow COP was outstanding, at least as far as the two important issues were concerned. It closed the shape of the future market mechanisms under the carbon market mechanisms, and it also closed the discussions on the residual transparency arrangements. So in that sense, it has finalized the Paris rulebook. But there are a number of issues still on the table, which I think we will need to address at the next COP and at the COPs beyond. Last year, TERI undertook this exercise of trying to identify the priorities from the developing world perspective. Okay, what should be the, how India is playing a very, very important role in advancing climate actions both nationally and globally, and identifying its own priorities to convey a global message that if we really want to stabilize the climate at 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees, and stabilize the climate in the earliest time frame, we will need to, take care of these concerns which are expressed in the Charter of Actions. And this was released last year at the Glasgow COP, and it has been taken note of by the personalities all over the world. Our Prime Minister himself was present there in the Glasgow COP, and he outlined the vision of India's climate actions. You must have noticed the 5 key elements, the Panchamrit as he calls it, where he has further scaled up the climate actions and the targets for the government, for the people of India. And he has also outlined his message about the climate justice and the $1 trillion finance goal to be adhered to by the rest of the world if we really have to advance the climate actions globally. Now, one fundamental concern which I think I would need to place on the table before I start inviting the honorable, the distinguished speakers here, is that the situation as it obtains today, if we have to get to the net zero goal by 2050, 2060, 2070, whatever is the time frame adopted by the various countries nationally. But if we need to have a global goal, then we will, I think, need to fast track the emissions trajectories. And how do we do that? Unless there is a net negative emissions in the developed world, because in the developing world, where the emissions are, the energy consumption is still rising and energy emissions may rise for some near future. So there has to be a balance of equity here, balance of global emissions here. So how do we address this concern? And to understand this, from the global and the international perspective, I'd like to invite the first speaker, Professor Pettri Taals, the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, to give his views, particularly on what the implications for climate policy which are emerging from the science and meteorological trends. Over to you, Professor Taals.
Professor Rashmi, and thanks for the invitation to address you and join this important event. I have had the pleasure to collaborate with TERI for the past 20 years and also participate in the previous summits physically, and hopefully we can do so in the near future. So I will share you some slides concerning the science, what science shows, and how the situation looks like from a science perspective. So I'm Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, and we are dealing with weather, climate, and water. And we are also the founding father of IPCC, and we are hosting IPCC. IPCC is just about to launch its Working Group 2 report next week. Where we are dealing with the impacts of climate change. And I will show you some slides what we know about climate change so far. So far, we have seen about 1.1 to 1.2 degrees warming, and there has been year-to-year variability in the temperature record, which is caused by El Niño, La Niña variability. During the El Niño years, we have higher temperatures, and La Niña is lower ones, and so far the maximum has been 2016. And we have been breaking all the time records in temperatures. For example, last year was the warmest ever here in Asia and also Europe, whereas in Southern Hemisphere we had these impacts of La Niña, which was cooling the temperatures. And we have been slowing down, for example, so-called the Gulf Stream, as you can see as an anomaly south of Greenland and Iceland. We have been breaking records in the main greenhouse gas concentrations year by year. And despite of the lockdowns caused by COVID, the emissions were, the real atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide were still growing. And carbon dioxide is responsible for 2/3 of the warming, and its lifetime is very long as compared to methane, which has only 11 years lifetime. So the main problem that we are facing is related to carbon dioxide and consumption of fossil fuels. We have stored more than 90% of the excess heat to oceans, and the seawater mass has been warming at all depths, and at the same time, since oceans are serving as a sink of carbon, we have started seeing acidification of the seawater, and this is already record breaking. Sea level rise used to be about 2 millimeters per year 20 years ago, and recently we have seen numbers which are exceeding 4 millimeters per year, and this boost is very much because of boost in and melting of glaciers, especially the Greenland and Antarctic glaciers are contributing this boost. And according to recent IPCC report, which was published in August, we expect this sea level rise to continue for the coming hundreds of years, because of the melting of glaciers will also continue for the coming hundreds of years. For example, the Himalayan glacier is one of those. This is what the IPCC shows the sea level rise estimates for by the end of this century. They are a bit higher than they used to be in the previous report, and by 2300 we estimate to see 0.5 meter to 3.5 meters in case that we would reach 2 degrees warming, and if we fail, then it would be much higher. This is quite uncertain. The uncertainty is related to the fact how quickly Antarctic glacier is melting. We are very much talking about the global warming, but the biggest impacts of climate change they have been felt through changes in precipitation patterns, and this map is showing what has happened during the past 100 years. There's a comparison to early decades of last century and to the recent decades, and you can see that, for example, southern Asia, and Africa and some parts of South America, they have become drier, whereas at high latitudes we have seen an increase in the rainfall amounts. In the past 20 years, more than half of the global population, they have been exposed to major natural disaster, and the amount of flooding events, drought events, and tropical storms, especially the category 4 and 5 tropical storms, they have been growing, and dominant ones are flooding and drought. We have seen a melting of the glaciers. There has been a boost in the glacier melting, and this is bad news when it comes to sea level rise, and it's especially bad news when it comes to availability of freshwater resources for countries like India and China, where the origin of the freshwater is coming from Himalayas. IMF has estimated that this current about 1 degree warming has already had a negative impact on economies in southern hemisphere and in the low latitudes of northern hemisphere, and the high latitudes of northern hemisphere, they have gained. It's warmer, it's raining more, and there's less need for heating energy. We just published this 1.5 degree report of IPCC 3.5 years ago, where there was an estimation how to reach 1.5, which would mean that we should bend this emission growth curve already during this decade and be carbon neutral by 2050. And that was the aim at Glasgow, and it's shown that this would be best for the welfare of mankind and biosphere. And if you would like to reach 2 degrees, then we have 20 more years time to bend this emission growth curve, and we should be carbon neutral by 2070s. And the IPCC report, which was published in August, is estimating what will happen to global rainfall amounts dependent on the warming rate. And you can see that there are plenty of brownish colors, which indicate that some parts of the world are getting drier, especially if you look at the soil moisture down there. You can see that Mediterranean region, Eastern Asia, both Americas, Australia are going to get drier anyhow. And if you go to higher numbers of warming, then this change is more dramatic. And some parts of the world will suffer from growth in rainfall amounts, and that's, for example, the case for India. And we are, so as I said, the water is the key issue, and here you can see global water stress hotspots already today and during the coming decades. And you can see Southern Asia, India, Eastern Asia, China, Middle East, Africa, Mediterranean region, and both Americas being very sensitive to changes in the precipitation patterns and melting of the glaciers. And this means that the Sustainable Development Goal 6, which is dealing with water, is very much lagging behind. Population growth is also one of our challenges. We will see more victims of climate change, and at the same time we will also see more consumers. And if you look at the map, you can see where we overlay the water challenge and population growth challenge. You can see that Africa, Middle East, and Southern Asia are the biggest challenges from that perspective. And if you go to warmer temperature standard at the Paris limits, there's a risk that we would lose global food security. Crop yield would be decreased, and you can see lots of reddish color here, areas where we are supposed to lose agricultural productivity, and only a few areas globally would gain from this. Finally, a few words about the emissions. The wealthy countries, they have been able to reduce their emissions, and in Glasgow, you heard fairly positive pledges coming from the G7 and European Union countries, which would indicate this 1.5 degree warming, whereas the rest of the G20 countries were not able to give such pledges, and that means that this 1.5 degree target is at the moment barely alive. And there's really a need to have more ambition in Sharm el-Sheikh and in Arab Emirates 1 year thereafter. This is our challenge globally. Here is energy consumption for transport, for industry, energy production. It's now 85% fossil and only 15% climate-friendly nuclear, hydro, and renewables. And to be successful in climate mitigation, we should revert those numbers during the coming decades. And this fossil energy is also contributing negatively to the air quality, which is a main challenge in countries like India and China at the moment. This is the vision of European Union, 90% reduction of emissions. You can see also the sectors which are important: power production, industry, and transport, and a slight increase in the zinc, and then European Union would be carbon neutral by 2050. And good news is that we have seen already 32 countries which have decoupled emission growth and GDP growth, and it's mainly European countries that you are listed here, and for example, Denmark, UK, and Finland have been able to reduce their emissions quite a bit during the past 15 years, and at the same time, economies have been growing. And what came out of Glasgow is that we are now on our track towards 2.5 to 3 degree warming instead of 1.5 to 2 degrees. So there's clearly a need to raise the ambition level to be successful in the future. With these words, thanks for the opportunity to address you, and thanks for hosting this very important event. Over to you in Delhi. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Taals. The message is clear. You have underlined the fact that the climate crisis is deepening, and in fact, the 1.5 degree target is likely to be breached if we go along the current pattern of emissions growth. So naturally, something immediately needs to be done, and in a very short time, as short as possible. We saw this discussion taking place in Glasgow, and the India's Prime Minister was there himself, and he outlined a very ambitious plan for India. And he also conveyed a message to the global community, the principle of climate justice, which is to be the anchor for advancing global actions. And 2023, next year, we are meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh, and then we will have the global stock take in 2023. So I would invite the Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forest, Government of India, to give our keynote address and also tell us what is the vision of the Government of India to address its priorities in COP27 and COP28, and what is the message which India has for the rest of the world.
Distinguished delegates, participants from India and abroad, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be interacting with all of you on the occasion of this Sustainable Development Summit organized by TERI. I think the relevance of this summit is all the more given the backdrop of COP26, the intense deliberations and discussions which went into every aspect of global warming and climate change challenges. And therefore, in that context, the commitments that the world has made and the commitments that India has made to the world acquire all that much more significance. We also believe in walking the talk. So therefore, after the COP26 was done and dusted, we have immediately moved forward and enunciated our goals, outlined our vision in the form of the budgetary announcements. Therefore, I think the world now has to take note of all the various dimensions that we expect the climate change dialogue to move towards in terms of the energy transitions that we're talking about. We're talking about increasing emphasis on electric vehicles, on green hydrogen, on solar power generation. And that is how we propose to achieve the target that we have stated in terms of non-fossil fuel capacities. We have also floated the green sovereign bond concept. And these are the areas which we now expect the world to sit up and take note of. This is the time for the best of investment to come into the country. This is the time for the best technology to come into India, because we mean business and we mean every bit of what we say in terms of a green economy and a green budget. And therefore, this is also the time when we want our voice to reach the world in terms of what exactly is beyond COP26? How do we work towards the Sharm el-Sheikh COP that is lined up later this year? What is it that we expect out of this conference later on? And I think there should be no doubt in anybody's mind that India is looking for clear and articulate positions being brought out in terms of climate finance and technology transfer. These are the real challenges. So while commitments and discussions have their own place in the scheme of things, how do we translate all these commitments? How do we translate our vision into action is the real challenge in front of all of us. Mr. Taals in his presentation just now has highlighted the concerns of global warming very, very clearly. The period between 2017 and 21 has been the highest in near memory. The ocean acidification, the sea levels rising, and the irony of higher global precipitation and yet water stress in many parts of the world. I think these are issues that cannot be brushed under the carpet, and we cannot simply think that whatever we have articulated and committed is sufficient to make us complacent and confident that we will achieve the targets. We have to work together in a concerted, coordinated, and collaborative manner. Therefore, what is it that is there on the table in terms of the Global Climate Fund? What is it in terms of a very flexible and agile system of decision-making and technology transfer? These are the issues that we want to highlight, particularly in view of the fact that one of this country's major challenges is not just the number of people who need to come up much more in the socio-economic way, but their vulnerability to climate disasters and climate-induced catastrophes. And therefore, that vulnerability needs to be addressed. And here, I'm sure all developing countries share the same concerns. So mitigation and adaptation, while they are very important, the adaptation part has to be given preeminence in the entire dialogue. And again, we come back to the core issues of climate finance and technology transfer. How much transparency is there? How much accountability is being brought in? What is the equity and inclusiveness that is there? These are the points that have to be discussed and deliberated as we work towards the next COP. Climate justice is something which Mr. Rashmi has repeatedly referred to. And I think that is the cornerstone of whatever India is trying to highlight in today's discussion of climate change. Because climate justice has to be a part of it. Where is the equity? Where is the inclusiveness otherwise? So today, as we move towards sustainable development, where we have to be on the development trajectory, and yet we have to at the same time be cognizant of the concerns of climate change. This is the question that we have to ask ourselves and which we have to ask all such dialogues that we are entering into. What is it at the end of the road? What is it on the table in terms of very clear and coordinated actions that are going to be taken? Otherwise, we will only be reinforcing what we've said already. We would not have moved in a very concrete direction, and then we would not have been able to achieve what each of us have set out to achieve. India is on track in terms of whatever our commitments were in the 2015 Paris Agreement. But is it true for the rest of the world? I think that is a question that has to be enunciated, that needs to be answered. So here again, I would like to highlight what we have already been saying, that this is a country which is taking on its duties and responsibilities in a very clear and concerted manner. But the responsibilities have to be shared equally among the global leaders, among the developed countries. And they have to come forward, they have to walk the extra mile. They have to walk the talk, as we believe we have been doing. So ladies and gentlemen, I think the message that I would certainly like to convey on behalf of the government of India in this very important summit that we are participating in is that if we really believe in the theme of sustainable development, we have to look at what is going into the making of this sustainability. What is it where the actions will speak louder than the words? And this is the time to completely enunciate our action plans. And I hope that in the course of these deliberations, something very specific, some issues will come forward, and all the different companies which are participating in this conference, the leaders from different countries, the policy makers, all of them would learn whatever are the best practices that other countries are bringing to the table, and we would be able to internalize, adopt, and adapt them. But at the backdrop of all this discussion has to be the financing to make this possible. So this is the message that I would like to convey. Thank you very much, and very good wishes for a very meaningful summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Leena Nandan, for extremely powerful message and very valid message to the rest of the world. You have underlined the importance of climate finance and technology transfer for advancing climate actions, both nationally and globally. At the last COP, we could not agree on many things, particularly on these issues, and then a new quantified goal for climate finance has to be agreed for whichever program has been announced. There is also the $100 billion fund, which has to be clearly articulated and achieved in 2025. Now, these are still aspirational goals which are yet to be realized, but the world cannot wait anymore now. As you have said, we need a sense of shared responsibility, and we need all the stakeholders to walk the talk, and actions must speak louder. That is the central message. Thank you very much. So now let me go to Mr. Alok Sharma, the president of the last COP, the COP26 president and the minister in the UK cabinet, who was leading the entire global climate efforts till last year, and even now till Egypt takes over. With the achievements which Glasgow COP achieved, and the issues which are yet to be settled, we would like to hear from you, Minister Sharma, about what is your vision for the next COP. The floor is yours, Mr. Minister.
Ministers, Excellencies, friends, it's a pleasure to join you. Last year, evidence of a fractured and fractious world was all around us as the pandemic continued to cause devastation across the globe. And yet, in a temporary structure on the banks of the River Clyde, 197 countries came together at COP26. And together, they committed to take action.
You're turning it on, sir. Just give me a second.
And they forged the Glasgow Climate Pact. This is the pact that calls on countries to revisit and strengthen their 2030 emission reduction targets as necessary to align with the Paris temperature goal by the end of this year. It commits us to rapidly scale up climate finance and to double finance for adaptation by 2025. It contains ambitious text on loss and damage, and it requests countries to phase down unabated coal power and phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Outside those Glasgow negotiating rooms, countries, businesses and finance made commitments to tackle climate change, to clean up sectors like power and road transport, to halt deforestation, to accelerate the pace of new technologies, and to support developing countries. We were absolutely delighted that Prime Minister Modi joined us in Glasgow to announce India's ambitious 2030 emission reduction targets, as well as India's plans to reach 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel energy capacity by 2030, and of course, a net zero target date. We thank India for signing the COP26 declaration on zero emission vehicles, through which companies, countries, and more committed to rapidly accelerate the clean transition. We welcomed India signing up to the Glasgow breakthroughs, through which countries committed to work together to accelerate the development and deployment of clean technologies so they're accessible and available to all. And we were pleased that the First Movers Coalition was launched at COP26, through which companies commit to use their purchasing power to spur clean development of technology. Founding members include Mahindra Group, Renew and Dalmia Cement. Thanks to what we achieved together, both inside and outside the negotiating rooms, we can say with credibility that the 1.5 degree limit lives. The commitments we secured at COP26 were historic. And yet, at the moment, they are just words on a page. And unless we honour the promises made to turn the commitments into the Glasgow Climate Pact into action, they will wither on the vine. And the 1.5 degrees will slip from our grasp. So the absolute focus of the UK COP26 year is delivery around 4 key goals. First, to ensure that countries reduce emissions as promised and go further to keep 1.5 alive. That means urging all governments to honour the Glasgow Climate Pact and revisit and strengthen their 2030 NDCs, these emission reduction targets, as necessary. The G20 will be my personal priority here. This group of nations accounts for 80% of global emissions and has a vital role to play in leading the way. We will also encourage countries with a net zero target to make a plan to get there if they haven't already done so. And, of course, ask all countries to turn their NDCs into policies and plans to deliver. Second, we aim to progress work on adaptation and loss and damage. As Prime Minister Modi said at COP26 in Glasgow, adaptation action, and I quote, is part of the most sensitive responsibility of human welfare. The UK COP26 presidency will work with developed countries this year towards the commitment to double adaptation finance. And with all parties, we will make progress towards the global goal on adaptation under the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work programme. And we aim to progress the Glasgow dialogue on loss and damage and to operationalise the Santiago network by COP27. Third, we want to deliver finance to support these efforts. The $100 billion remains critical, and by COP27 we must be able to show that we are on a trajectory to meet that $100 billion goal. We will also work with all parties to make progress on the post-2025 climate finance goal. And of course, with other parties, we will develop partnerships to fund the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy in Pacific countries, supporting their national plans. Our fourth and final goal is to push for further action across critical sectors such as coal, cars and ending deforestation, working with countries and partners. And in all of this, we will work hand in hand with Egypt, the COP27 presidency, and of course support the holder of the COP28 presidency, the UAE. And we want to partner with India to support your clean energy plans. Here, India is a global pioneer. Prime Minister Modi announced ambitious energy plans in Glasgow, and together, India and the UK launched the Green Grids initiative, One Sun, One World, One Grid, to help spread the benefits of cheap, clean power across continents. This is just one example of the clean energy partnership between our two nations. A partnership on which we want to build across the year of our presidency and indeed beyond to support India's success in bringing the economic and development benefits of clean power to communities across this extraordinary country. There is no doubt that India is seizing the opportunities of the clean economy. I've seen this myself in recent visit. From travelling on a prototype hydrogen bus in Delhi to being shown the benefits of rooftop solar by Dr. Ajay Mathur. And 2 of the 3 finalists in Prince William's Earthshot Prize for Clean Air were from India. Vinisha Umashankar, who is just 14 years old, has developed a solar-powered ironing cart as an alternative to charcoal. And Vidyut Mohan of social enterprise Takacha was the overall winner. His portable technology converts crop residue into commercial bioproducts, which removes the need to burn agricultural waste. Working together, whether on clean technology development or through partnerships around your energy transition, we want to support India's efforts. Together, we need to ensure that this vital year, 2022, is one of delivery. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister, for underlining the joint efforts which India and UK are planning to undertake to advance their climate ambition and their movement towards an aggressive energy transition. You have underlined the fact that 1.5 degree limit was the one outstanding achievement of Glasgow COP, that this target and this limit lives. The challenge is to implement this goal into reality through actions. And at Glasgow COP, you have mentioned about the Sharm el-Sheikh program on adaptation goal for the world as a whole. And the world will watch with interest as to what happens to this work program, how we are able to advance the actions, not just in terms of energy, adoption of technology, but also in addressing the climate vulnerabilities through an adaptation goal. So let me now invite the Honorable Minister from Egypt, Mr. Sameh Hassan Shukri, who is going to be the next president of the Climate COP, for his views and his vision about what needs to be done to address the climate challenge. Over to you, Honorable Minister.
It is my pleasure to address the World Sustainable Development Summit organized by the prestigious Energy and Resources Institute of India. I want to take this opportunity to thank the Institute for its commendable work on climate, energy, and sustainable development for the benefit of developing countries worldwide. No other title for this session would have been more relevant than COP Charter of Action. Indeed, a Charter of Action is what we need at this critical point in our planet's history, one that focuses on actual implementation rather than unfulfilled promises. And this is exactly what Egypt will promote to the international community to deliver to the world in Sharm el-Sheikh. To this effect, I wish to briefly outline 3 priorities that the COP27 presidency will be aiming to achieve come November. First, making sure that COP27 constitutes a turning point in global climate action, turning this decade of action towards tangible implementation and delivery at scale, bridging the gaps in mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, and climate finance. Second, enhancing ambition at all levels and on all fronts by continuing to urge for further revised NDCs from parties that have yet to submit theirs, aligned with the Paris Agreement temperature goals, and based on the best available science in accordance with IPCC reports and findings. Third, empowering youth and civil society, making sure that younger generations continue to have a voice in the process, and that those who continue to suffer the most from the impacts of climate change are provided the space to speak their minds and highlight to politicians and decision makers the importance of taking the sometimes painful but necessary steps in the right direction. For us to move together from Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh and guarantee outcomes that serve the greater good, I will be reaching out to all parties, building trust and searching for the right landing zones. Together with my team, I will make sure that no country is left behind and that COP27 delivers outcomes that address the priorities and needs of everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. The last phrase which you mentioned and underlined was extremely important. No country should be left behind. And that means that the climate actions must take into account the needs of the most vulnerable sections of the world community, and which largely live in the developing world. So thank you also for outlining your priorities, which you have laid down for your country and the international community. Let me now invite Mr. Yasu Takahashi, the Executive Director of the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. And I'll request him when he talks to us, if he could give us not only a vision about how we are going to address the needs of the energy transition and the emissions reduction, but also how this entire debate about climate actions and advancing climate ambitions is going to deal with the issues of equity and climate vulnerability in the rest of the world. Over to you, Mr. Takahashi.
Thank you, Chair, for the kind introduction, and distinguished participants. Greeting from IGES, the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies in Japan. And I sincerely thank Dr. Dawan, Director General of TERI, and her colleagues for extending this invitation to address the World Sustainable Development Summit 2022. IGES and TERI have collaborated closely for over a decade, and this is another indication of our ongoing standing partnership. The theme of WSDS 2022, Towards a Resilient Planet, Ensuring a Sustainable and Equitable Future, deserves great attention of policymakers, industry, civil society, and other stakeholders. By the end of 2021, a substantial number of countries had embarked on a net zero pathway by making strong commitments towards carbon neutrality. In Asia, India, Japan, China, and South Korea, among others, announced their strategies to achieve these goals. We hope this will inspire other Asian countries to take similar broad steps, but increased financial support is also needed for climate change mitigation and adaptation in these parts of the world. An assessment of the domestic mitigation and adaptation needs for developing countries could help us understand how to strengthen the financial mechanisms. We also need to understand how to address other sustainability challenges and priorities, such as gender budgeting and biodiversity conservation. Enthusiastic discussions at COP26 in Glasgow last year would increase global policy attention on adaptation in the months ahead. Adaptation finance needs to be doubled by 2025, and it needs to reach the vulnerable countries and communities that need it most, supporting locally led adaptation. The Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program on the global goal of adaptation and the upcoming discussion in framework and metrics should also contribute to enhancing adaptation efforts. IGES will join and strengthen these efforts by, for example, developing capacity in vulnerable countries and communities through the Asia-Pacific Climate Change Adaptation Information Platform, which is AP-PLAT in short. We are also strongly interested in promoting circulating ecological sphere, which is CES, in which local area sustainably utilize their local resources and exchange them with neighboring areas according to the unique characteristics of each area. Another important area for mobilizing adaptation finance is nature-based solutions, or NBS. NBS are potential solutions to social challenges that rely on nature and as well as benefiting the nature. NBS stands in contrast with subsidies that accelerate biodiversity loss. They enable the mobilization of private investment in nature, including credit enhancement mechanism. Dear participants, as we head toward COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, I foresee 3 areas of importance. First, net zero goals declared by countries undeniably give strong momentum to the long-term mitigation and adaptation goals in the world. Technology collaboration among countries will play a key role in meeting these targets and also for accelerating towards Paris Agreement goals. Second, innovation plays a major role in working towards climate neutrality. We have every reason for optimism in our ability to drastically expand clean energy and improve energy efficiency. One of the most important things we can do is to ensure the flow of finance to support further innovation and to ensure that innovations of various types and from various sectors need to be given due support. Third, the global efforts on adaptation will accelerate with ever-increasing call for adaptation finance and continued discussion on global goal on adaptation. Emerging approaches such as nature-based solutions also have a promise to feed into these efforts. Success in dealing with the environmental challenges that we face will depend largely on our capacity to support each other. Dear participants, let me conclude my speech by extending an IGES hand in partnership to all who share our concerns and our enthusiasm for the future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Takahashi, for extremely valuable and very focused remarks. And you have underlined, you have highlighted the issue of adaptation finance, and the strategy through which it can be achieved. Of course, the emphasis on net zero remains there, but you have also underlined the importance of innovation or technology cooperation to be able to move in that direction. Thank you very much. Let me now go over to Mr. Stig, who is the Director of the Department for Climate and Environment, NORAD, in the government of Norway. While inviting him to address us and give his thoughts, I'll request him to also underline or touch upon this issue of people-centric transition. We are talking about net zero goal globally and energy transition at the national levels, but is it possible to achieve this in the absence of people-centric transition and without adopting an ecosystem-based approaches which addresses vulnerabilities of the people? Over to you, Mr. Travik.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting me to address this very important summit. I'm very honored to be part of the World Sustainable Development Summit 2022. Virtually, I would have loved to be in Delhi with you, also because India is, of course, a leader on environment and climate.
Hopefully next year you will be here.
I would love to. And let me first also recognize India's important role. I think India is already a leader in solar energy. India has very high ambition on renewable energy. And support for this transition is something which we in the Norwegian government also put very high on our agenda. India is also very advanced in nature positive agriculture, low input agriculture, and regenerative agriculture. Also has a lot to offer in terms of lessons to the world there. India has, of course, very low per capita emissions and has ambitious goals on its climate transition. I would also like to recognize India as one of the pioneers in recognizing the importance of oceans, also in terms of climate. This is an interest and view that we share in Norway with India. As I think previous speakers pointed out, people in developing countries will be most affected by climate change, and some of the most vulnerable regions in some of the poorest countries will be especially affected. So I was asked to also say a little bit about how I think climate finance can address this. The Honorable Indian Minister also pointed to the importance of innovation in climate finance. I think that is very important as well. So innovation, green bonds, getting the right kind of finance, both concessional and non-concessional, to the right place is very important. One of the positive outcomes of Glasgow, I would say, is also the recognition of how development and climate are tied together. This is a view that we share in Norway. We're also happy to see that this is a view that the multilateral development banks share in international development. The connections between climate and development is increasingly recognized and put as a priority in terms of programming as well. This is a priority we support. Adaptation definitely needs to be higher on the agenda. Unless we're able to do well on adaptation, we will not be able to reach the Sustainable Development Goals in terms of other areas, including poverty food security, all the development goals as well. On our side, in Norway, we're trying to walk the talk. So we are doubling our climate financing from $800 million a year to $1.6 billion a year. We are also within that tripling the portion that goes to adaptation. So definitely we recognize that we need to do more on climate, and within that, doing even more on adaptation is a key priority. So we're supporting the adaptation fund. We are looking into what more we can do in terms of weather services. How can we make weather services relevant to those who really need them in a world where floods, drought, extreme weather will be more prevalent. So I was very happy also to see that the World Meteorological Organization was here. And we agree, technology transfer and capacity building is very important. It should be a key priority moving towards Sharm el-Sheikh. I was also asked to comment on metrics when it comes to adaptation. I am so lucky that I don't have to worry about that as we are implementing and not deciding on the policies. But I think I recognize it's a very important point. But again, I would underline what we do. What we actually do is much more important than the exact metrics. But we agree that the focus on adaptation definitely needs to be higher. We will prioritize this. It will be a main feature of our development policy, that adaptation will be part of whatever we do in terms of agriculture. We will have that in mind when we work on energy. We will have it in mind on whatever we work on. I think as the chairman pointed to, people-centric and acceptable transition will be key. Whatever we do will fail unless people see climate adaptation and transition to a more climate-friendly world is in their interest, also in their daily lives. We still think that ending coal needs to be on top of our list of priorities. But we need to couple that with making sure that people have access to electricity. We need to make sure we have clean cooking. We need to, in general, focus on energy access and on availability of it. In a socially acceptable way. Ending negative fossil fuel subsidies is important, but at the same time we need to find socially acceptable alternatives. We can not just remove subsidies from people without giving them an alternative. We think greener taxes is probably something we can collaborate more on. Many cities have done well in increasing taxes on car transportation while improving public transport, for example. That is a way to provide a socially acceptable transition. Nature-based solutions was mentioned. I think it's key that we develop our policies in a way which recognizes the importance of nature. In a world with more extreme weather, I would also underline the importance of nature for agriculture, for food security, that this linkage needs to be at the key of what we work on.
Yeah.
And when we do that, of course, paying attention to the interest of local people and indigenous people needs to be at the heart of our of what we do. Again, that's the only way. Protecting nature with people, not by keeping them out, is the only acceptable way. I think my time is up, so I'd like to thank you for your attention and hope to see you in Delhi next year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Travik. That was great of you, very nice of you to have covered a very large gamut in your statements. And I noted particularly your emphasis on walking the talk in closing the gap, not only in terms of emissions, but also in terms of contribution to the financial resources. And then, of course, there is plenty of potential for doing further work in this area. Let me now, with this, let me go over to the last speaker of today's session, Ms. Deepali Khanna, Managing Director of the Asia Region Office of the Rockefeller Foundation. This foundation needs no introduction. They have done extremely valuable work in this, in these socially relevant issues. So let's hear from her. What is the vision of the Rockefeller Foundation to the next COP and to the next COP? Over to you, Mr. Deepali.
Thank you, and distinguished delegates in the TERI team. I'm truly honored to be here today at the World Sustainable Development Summit with you all, and would have loved to be there in person, but for now we'll have to do it virtually. It is really remarkable to see so many stakeholders committed to building a more resilient planet and to charting a more sustainable, equitable future in the face of the greatest existential threat of our generation, which is climate change. We all know that climate change is a ticking time bomb. In the last few years, we've seen the planet reminding us we simply have no more time to lose. Be it annual flooding in Chennai and Kerala or wildfires in the West, both tragic instances that are an attestation to this fact. The time for us to act is now, and we need to take drastic action to reverse its effects. All of us gathered here have an opportunity to give our future generations a recovered planet and not a reduced one. If we don't act now, then we are on track to breach 1.5 degrees in temperature by 2040, which the IPCC has categorized as a code red for humanity. While some countries are on track to reach their climate change goals, globally, we still face a huge challenge before us. About 3.6 billion people globally lack access to reliable electricity to beat the cycle of energy poverty, and about 800 million of those people live in complete darkness with no access to electricity. We need to work on transitioning to a greener future and eliminating the hurdles that inhibit us from ensuring that the transition is truly just. One of the hindrances for developing countries tackling climate change is the issue of climate finance. Even though the developed world had committed $100 billion in annual funding by 2020, they were unable to mobilize the resources needed to meet the target. While the funding is now likely to be deployed under the Climate Finance Delivery Plan by 2023, that should not make us complacent. We should have a forward-looking vision and look beyond 2023 and work with development finance institutions, private capital, and philanthropies to develop solutions that can have a positive impact in averting the climate crisis. We at the Rockefeller Foundation are taking the lead in working on innovative financial solutions to help the countries in achieving their nationally determined goals. At COP26, we launched the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet with $10 billion in committed capital and plan to leverage an additional $100 billion over the course of the next 10 years. The Alliance will work with partners around the world to leverage this catalytic capital and attract a range of financing, including the development finance institutions and private capital. The Alliance is a whole of society approach to everything being done and will be done. While countries and governments will play a critical role in tackling climate change, action will need to go beyond just that. Countries should convey the challenges of the climate emergency to their societies and actively involve them in discussions on how to tackle the same. If you look back at COP26, civil society was actively engaging in finding pathways to cut carbon emissions as countries. Through the Alliance, we hope to continue to bring civil society actors together to help with bold, collaborative, integrated thinking and investments that will address the short-term as well as long-term challenges posed by climate change. We know that the battle against climate change cannot be won by a small subset of countries or by partial efforts. This is a battle we can only win together. A sentiment I'm heartened to see being shared and emphasized by so many of our esteemed speakers. India's commitment at COP26 to reduce its total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons, reach net zero by 2070, and meet half its energy requirements with renewable fuels is the kind of trailblazing leadership we need. It shows that India can lead the way for emerging economies worldwide who will also experience a growing demand for reliable power and clean power. The decade ahead will be key to meeting this demand with a viable low-carbon pathway. India's leadership at COP26, including the International Solar Alliance and the recently launched Green Grids Initiative, One Sun, One World, One Grid, and Climate Finance Leadership Initiative with the UK government, showcases its commitment to climate action. The progress in India has been tremendous, but challenges remain. Despite widespread grid connectivity, millions of people face a highly unreliable energy supply, while 40% of rural businesses still rely on expensive and polluting diesel. Hence, energy transition should not only focus on renewable, but also ensure a just transition for people who are dependent on fossil fuels for their livelihood. The Alliance can help with this transition by catalyzing investments, providing technical support, and promoting regulatory changes needed to scale the latest advances in green technology across India and create green jobs. The Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet is committed to working with India and governments worldwide to help in the green energy transition. We invite you to join us on the road to COP27 as we work to change energy for good. Please reach out to our offices in Bangkok, Nairobi, or New York to find out more about the call for country partnerships and how you can work together with the Alliance. We must build upon the successes of COP26 and at COP27, push for emission reductions, adapting to the impacts of climate change and climate finance with a focus on finance for adaptation. Together, we can do what was once unimaginable, ensure the fight for our planet also lifts up people, all people everywhere. Thank you.
Great, truly commendable and outstanding. Thank you very much for telling us of these efforts by the Global Energy Alliance, which Rockefeller is a proud member of and maybe a founder. And this is indeed, this is the way to go forward. Without ambitious climate mobilization, we cannot really proceed in the direction of green energy transition. So it is a good way forward, and I'm sure this is a good example for the other leading coalitions. Thank you very much. With this, we have come to the end of the session. It has been an extremely enriching and enlightening session. I have learned a lot about the perspectives of the global leaders, the leaders of civil society, the governments, and the policymakers who have told us about what their vision is for the next COP and the climate actions which are going to sustain beyond the next COP. I mean, we were truly privileged to have the benefit of views from the two the COP presidents, the past one and the next one, and it was indeed heartening to note that while the past COP president noted that the NDCs could not be revised substantially, but the 1.5 degree goal remained alive. And the next, the Honorable Minister from Egypt underlined the fact that he has 3 clear priorities, and that includes one of them as the NDC revision. So hopefully we will be able to close the emissions gap, considering the challenge that we have before us, which Prof. Taals has outlined. that if we don't do ambitious actions in a very, very short time frame, we will reach 3.5 degrees above the pre-industrial level, and that is going to be disastrous. So the science warns us, the policymakers and the governments must take actions quickly, and hopefully with the advice that we are receiving from everyone, from all of you, all the governments and the civil society stakeholders, practitioners, stakeholders will be able to advance their actions. The dominant thoughts which have emerged, as I can see, is that there must be an emphasis clearly on enhancing the climate finance flows and achieving the adaptation goals. If we have to achieve really a net zero economy and a global economy as a whole. So net zero economy for the world as a whole is really meaningful and achievable only if we balance our actions both in terms of closing the emissions gap through equitable actions in the developed world and the developing world, and through ambitious actions on climate finance, encouraging the climate finance flows, in which all the stakeholders can play a very major role, including the civil society, the corporates, the industry leaders, and the governments. Adaptation hopefully will be adopted, the adaptation goal for the global community as a whole. Hopefully this will be clinched, if not in the next COP, in the next COP. So with this, let me conclude this session. I once again thank all the speakers and the participants in this special high-level session. I thank them for their address and their remarks and outlining their vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leena ji. Bye.